This is Inclarity Podcast. I'm RJ Starr. You post something, a thought, a picture, a win, maybe a moment of struggle. Then you check. Who saw it? Who didn't? Who liked it? Who didn't? Who viewed your story but never said a word? You refresh again. No new likes. But you know who looked. It's a quiet ritual, casual, habitual, nearly invisible. But it's not random. There's a reason you keep tabs. Not because you're needy, not because you're vain, and not even because you're curious. At least, not in the superficial sense. You're checking something deeper than attention. You're checking emotional reciprocity. It's not about the like, it's about the meaning behind the like. It's not about whether they saw your story, it's about whether they see you. And when they look but say nothing, your mind starts filling in the blanks. Did they ignore me on purpose? Did I overshare? Did I make them uncomfortable? Are they watching but no longer close? What you're really monitoring isn't engagement, it's closeness. These small behaviors become psychological proxies for invisible dynamics. Digital footprints take the place of real conversations. A view becomes a signal. A silence becomes a slight. And your brain registers all of it. Because in an environment where people don't say what they feel, and feelings are rarely clarified out loud, you start using data to measure intimacy. This is emotional bookkeeping. Every time you look to see if they watched your story but didn't reply, it's not just about this post, it's about the pattern. Are they pulling back? Are they keeping tabs on you without effort, vulnerability, or contact? Are they consuming your life passively while staying absent? You don't need hundreds of likes. You just needed them to witness it, to respond, to bridge the distance. That's why you keep tabs. Because the numbers don't matter. The absence does. This is especially true in relationships that once held warmth. People who used to reach out, respond, affirm. When that behavior changes, when they go silent but still show up as a viewer, it triggers a unique kind of dissonance. They're here, but they're not here. It's the psychological equivalent of someone standing at your front window, but never knocking. They see you. They just don't speak. And that is where the discomfort begins. Human connection is built on mutual signaling. We are pattern recognition machines. Your brain is designed to notice who's attuned to you and who's not. And in the absence of verbal communication, the brain will scan for anything to make sense of that absence. Seen, not liked, viewed, not replied, following, never engaging. Each one becomes a social cue, a tiny behavioral breadcrumb. And the more emotionally invested you are in that person, the more meaning you assign to those crumbs. We often dismiss this behavior as insecurity, as if keeping tabs is just a symptom of low self-esteem. But that's too simple, and often wrong. What looks like insecurity is often an attempt to locate yourself inside an ambiguous emotional dynamic. The problem is, the metrics you're tracking were never designed to carry emotional weight. They were designed for advertisers, not relationships. But the brain doesn't care. It takes whatever data it can find and tries to build a theory of mind, a story that explains someone's behavior, especially when that behavior has changed. Because inconsistency is far more psychologically destabilizing than rejection. If someone simply doesn't follow you, doesn't check your story, doesn't interact at all, you register that as clarity. But if someone used to engage and now doesn't, yet still watches, that inconsistency becomes emotionally loaded. You start to wonder, are they resentful? Are they bored? Are they waiting for something? It's the uncertainty that's intolerable. Because uncertainty threatens psychological safety. When the social contract is unclear, your brain can't rest. It keeps tabs because it's trying to solve something. And it thinks the answer lies in the pattern of their behavior. That's why even when you tell yourself not to care, you still check. It doesn't mean you're desperate. It means your brain is trying to decode silence. And digital silence is confusing because it's performative. They watched, after all, which means they chose to. They engaged just enough to register in your mind, but not in your life. This is a uniquely modern form of ambivalent attachment. Someone keeps a window open to you, but never walks through the door. That's why it feels personal. Because it is. Even if they didn't mean it to be, their passivity is still affecting your sense of relational stability. And that's not your fault for noticing. It's a normal function of social cognition. We're wired to notice who shows up, and even more, who disappears. Keeping tabs, in that sense, is not just about them. It's about trying to stabilize yourself. It's about trying to answer questions like, am I still wanted? Did I say too much? Am I being punished, or ignored, or forgotten? These aren't superficial questions. They're primal ones. Belonging is a fundamental need, and when something as small as a missing like or a quiet story view triggers anxiety, it's not because you're fragile, it's because somewhere a connection feels compromised, and you haven't been given the dignity of clarity. That's what hurts. Not the metrics, not the algorithm, but the ambiguity. You were conditioned to associate silence with distance, to associate withdrawal with judgment, and to associate passive observation with fading care. Whether or not that's true depends on context. But the impact is real, either way. So, no, you're not obsessed, you're not paranoid, you're not overanalyzing, you're attuned to shifts in tone, attuned to changes in availability, attuned to the difference between closeness and contact. The real issue is not that you're keeping tabs. The issue is that we now live in a world where digital residue has replaced direct communication. You don't always get a phone call anymore. You get a view, you get a like, you get a nothing, and you're expected to interpret that nothing with grace. But the mind doesn't interpret silence neutrally. It fills in gaps, and those gaps are rarely generous. That's why the behavior persists. You don't keep tabs because you're addicted to validation. You keep tabs because you're trying to make invisible dynamics visible, trying to understand where you stand, trying to reconcile how someone can still be present in your feed, but absent in your life, trying to determine whether the relationship is still intact or whether it's simply hanging on through passive signals and outdated familiarity. It is not wrong to want clarity, and sometimes the only place your mind can find it is in the tiny data points that tell a bigger story. They saw you, they didn't speak, and that matters.